Yeah.
Right. As the House can see, there's still several members trying to get in, and the wind-ups are going to start at 5:30. So if members could show time constraint and actually reduce it themselves from the 5 minutes to maybe 3.5 minutes, then everybody perhaps will get in. Sheryll Murray.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I'll try to be brief. I'd like to congratulate the Honourable Member for the Wrekin for calling this as well, because it's given me the opportunity to introduce you to Donkey, who is a Barbary macaque and who now lives in my constituency. And if members want to see what he looks like, I'd be happy to show you afterwards. His story is not a happy one. Caught as a youngster and smuggled from Morocco into Europe, probably via Spain, Donkey wound up as a circus performer. Donkey suffered years of abuse in the circus, where he was beaten and forced to perform in front of large crowds. He was castrated to avoid him becoming aggressive towards his captors, and denied the company of others of his kind, something which causes immense mental and emotional suffering in all primates. All primates are highly social animals. Maternal deprivation is known to hinder not only psychological development, but has physiological consequences, such as abnormal brain development. Donkey displays signs of all of these damages. He has very poor social skills and is underdeveloped for a monkey of his age. Donkey will never be able to return to the wild due to the damage he has sustained, but he does now live with friends of his own species, and I hope that in time Donkey will be able to live a fairly fulfilled life in my constituency of South East Cornwall at the Wild Futures Monkey Sanctuary near Loo. I would like to give a quick plug to the Monkey Sanctuary, who do fantastic work, and if you are down our way during the recess, then please do pop in and see them, because Donkey and all his friends would love to see you. And more importantly, your entrance fee and donations will feed him and other rescued primates at this centre. So please remember Donkey and the message that he cannot bring to this debate himself. It's time to ban wild animals in all circuses, and so to see the terrible life that Donkey has suffered not repeated, and that's why I'm going to support the motion.
Nick Dakin.
It's a pleasure to follow the member for South East Cornwall, who has spoken up for animals such as Donkey that can't speak up for themselves. So it's a pleasure to follow her, and it's a pleasure to speak in this debate, and I congratulate the Honourable Member for the Wrekin, Poplar and Limehouse and Colchester for bringing this debate. It's been a very important debate across the House. There's overwhelming amounts of public support for the introduction of a ban on the use of wild animals in circuses, and it's crucially important we have a vote on this today, and I'm pleased to hear from the Honourable Member for the Wrekin that that's going to be a free vote across the whole House, because that's what the country is asking for on this issue, and that's what the country should have. There are only 3 circuses left in the UK, as we've heard, using wild animals in performances. And it's recognised that to do this for human entertainment is unethical and can't be justified and should therefore be opposed. The previous government consulted the country on a ban on the use of wild animals in circuses in 2009, a consultation that closed in March 2010. With over 10,000 responses received by the consultation, 94.5% of the respondents supported the ban, and that's the extent of public opinion which we are feeling in our post bags over the last couple of weeks. I'm happy to give way.
I'm wondering if my honourable friend, like myself, has received one item of correspondence from someone who's against the ban. It wasn't a constituent of mine, it was from an address in Dorset, but I've had hundreds and hundreds of other pieces of information, emails and letters from constituents of mine calling for a ban, but only one correspondence from someone in Dorset who's against the ban.
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention. I have received no correspondence against the ban, and indeed in this debate this afternoon we've only heard one contribution from one member urging a different point of view, and it's good that that point of view has been put, because it's important within democratic debate that all points of view are on the table. I'm particularly pleased to see a good turnout for Lib Dems on this debate, because I suspect, Mr. Speaker, that they have a certain empathy with circus animals as an endangered species kept against their will for the entertainment of others. But seriously, this is a serious issue, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And if this motion is carried today, the government should listen to honourable members across both sides of the House, should listen to members of the public, it should listen to what the British people are saying, and it should stop clowning about and introduce a ban on circus.
That's just straight to that, isn't it? Andrew Bray. Andrew Bray.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. As a child, I did get rather excited by the prospect of a visit to a circus. And one of the reasons why was because I wanted to see all these exotic animals that I didn't normally get close to. Apart from those that I sometimes saw in zoos, which were in those days rather caged affairs. But I do think, obviously, things have changed. We are all now entertained by brilliant films shown on TV and cinemas, giving us amazing footage of wild animals in their natural habitat. Most zoos are made to look rather boring by David Attenborough. We are also, thanks to many animal welfare organisations, much better educated about world wildlife and how it should be treated. And of course, for those who really do want to see wildlife close up, let's not forget the modern tourist industry. You know, if you save up your pennies, if you really want to get close up to the animals, then it's perfectly possible these days to take yourself off on a safari or a trip to a rainforest or something. These are the ways that we can see wild animals at their best. And there really is no excuse or need for wild animals in circuses. The more we know and understand them, the more we all recognise that a circus tent is no place for these magnificent animals, many of whom, or at least some of whom, may have been whipped, goaded and herded into their rather pathetic performances. I can still remember from going to circus that when the lions came in, the big animals, there was immediately an extra security put on, and a man appeared with a whip, if not a chair. And that tells us everything that we need to know. Basically, these animals, of course, they're not safe in a circus environment, and they have to be controlled. Of course, they can't be relied on to relax and enjoy themselves. They are in an unnatural environment, surrounded by human beings on all sides, who they are instinctively frightened of. Frankly, these animals' continued presence in the circus ring, even if there are only about 39 of them, diminishes us all. I know that some will argue that some of the animals are not in fact wild because they were born already in captivity. We've heard that this afternoon. Well, I don't see what difference that makes. A lion or an elephant still has natural instincts. It still needs proper space to move around in. And being driven around the country for much of the year in the back of a van is no place for these animals. I'll give way.
Thank you. I'm very grateful for the honourable member for giving way. Would she not agree with me that by introducing a firm ban with a firm date, it means that no new animals will be brought into circuses, and indeed it will put the circus owners on notice that those currently within circuses will need to be retired to appropriate circumstances that suit their needs?
I certainly agree that we need a ban. I'm just a little bit worried about the time frame being practical, but I'll come back to that if I may later on. I would also like to put on record that I'm not in favour of banning all animals from circuses. I actually do think there are some more domesticated animals that thoroughly enjoy themselves, and dogs and ponies spring to mind. I do recall going to a charming little circus in France where a farmer, his wife, their 2 children, a goat and a dog held us all spellbound for about an hour. And I can tell you that that dog and that goat really had a good time being treated every time they did something brilliant. So, we know that there's room for some animals, it's just not these big wild animals that's such a problem. In conclusion, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want a ban on wild animals in circuses. I recognise, however, that there may be certain legal obstacles to getting it straight away. I do think that maybe a time frame of 1 year is just a little bit impractical. I'm not an expert on EU law, but I do know that before you could probably introduce a ban of that sort, there would have to be consultation, and also you would have to find a way of rehoming those 39 animals that are left. That is why I probably intend to abstain this evening. However, I also put the government on notice that I do want to see a ban, and I want it to do whatever it must do in order to make it possible to introduce a ban as practically soon as it possibly can.
Bob Russell.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, as the third signatory to this motion, I'd like to congratulate my colleagues from the Wrekin and Poplar Limehouse for their positive speeches, and I'd also like to pay tribute to the Honourable Member for Romford for his bravery in the Lion's Den as being the only member so far to speak against the motion. That does take courage, and I do congratulate him on that. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I do detect the fingerprints of 10 Downing Street on this. I have tabled a parliamentary question. I await the written answer with great interest. Opposing live animal acts in circuses is something which I first got involved on the 15th of May 1971 when, as a borough councillor of 48 hours, I was contacted by Mr. Murphy of Barrack Street, who urged me to get circuses banned in Colchester. I put that to the council. I was lone voice. Nothing happened. But a few years later, Colchester did become one of the first local authorities in the country to ban circuses from its land, its buildings. Unfortunately, we need a nationwide government ban because we still have a landowner in the town who, I regret, allows his land to be used for circuses. They are barbaric. They have no place in civilised society in the 21st century.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. I'll be very brief. I'd like to congratulate him on his long-standing work on this and other animal protection issues, and also just to make the comment that many of our councils led the way on this, but they don't have quite enough powers, as the honourable member said, and therefore I think we should move on this issue as soon as possible.
I'm grateful for those comments, and also following up what happens to the remaining 39 animals. I'm pretty confident that the zoos of this country will be ready and available to accommodate them. Colchester Zoo took in 3 elephants from a circus, and Rolf Harris was there to open the Spirit of Africa, and the bull elephant in particular was very pleased because he was then with 4 cows which he had to look after. So he was very, very happy. Now, just to conclude, Mr. Deputy Speaker, there are circuses that we can support, the Chinese State Circus, the Moscow State Circus in particular, but also local small circuses of just a few people involved. Now, subject to confirmation that the Netherlands National Circus is indeed animal-free, as I'm advised, it is currently performing in Ipswich, next week in Lowestoft, and the week after that in Colchester, and I intend to be there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Neil Parish.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'm delighted to rise to support this resolution because I feel that it is high time that we banned animals in circuses, and I don't think that I've been very worried with the stance, and I'm very glad that the government now has given us the government whips have given us a free vote on this, because I believe animal welfare is very much a moral issue, and I think there are people on all sides of this House that thoroughly support an idea of a ban on wild animals being used in circuses. I also feel that the government's plank of this case in Austria is a rather fragile plank, I think, and I rather fear it might be sawn off at some stage. And I would actually much rather that we took a much firmer stance and actually went for a ban and then let somebody challenge it if they want to, because I don't think that will happen. Yes.
Given the position he set out to the House, could he perhaps explain why he decided to leave this amendment, which, if my understanding is correct, would have prevented any ban coming in until some sort of supposed EU legal issue was resolved?
I will go on to deal with that matter just a little bit further on in my speech, because I do actually feel that we, and I have actually made statements quite clearly, that we should actually challenge this court ruling in Austria. But what we have got to do, and I think there's been too much today, if I may say so, being talked about the process of government and who's to blame and who's not to blame, and actually get down to the actual grips with what is the animal welfare issue of animals in circuses. Because in the meantime, like I said, if we cannot, and if the legal situation is proved to me that we do have to take notice of this case in Austria, yeah?
He talks about the discussion about process and all the rest of it. Surely the best thing to do is to just vote in favour of this motion and get the ban put in place. Job done.
Yes, but it will take a little while to put the ban in place, and so therefore let's actually look at some of the proposals in front of us from an animal welfare point of view. And there is, if you are going to take animals around in circuses and you're going to transport them, the way they're being transported at the moment is totally wrong, and the conditions need to be improved greatly. There needs to be much greater inspection, and then that will actually levy a much greater cost on these circuses when they are taking performing animals around. So therefore there is a great deal of pressure that could be put on in the meantime before we bring in a ban. We can also look, because the honourable member for Romford, who I may disagree with, but can actually raise these points, and that's part of democracy. But one thing he did talk about is a lot of these animals in the way that they have performed over the years. They will need to be rehabilitated, they will need to be found homes, and so therefore let's use this time to good effect. And I think what we want the government to do, and all of us do, is actually to listen to have a total ban. And so therefore I don't know what the Minister is going to say in a minute, but I would actually like him to have the opportunity to be able to say that the government has rethought on this one and that they are mindful to ban in the future, because I think that is absolutely where we want to take this, because we cannot in this day and age actually have, I believe, wild animals in circuses, and let's be absolutely sure this is wild animals in circuses. And I also think many of us know too that the amount of training and the way those animals are trained in order to perform in what are not natural acts are really extremely painful in many circumstances. So let's make sure that we ban it. Yes.
Grateful to the honourable member, but I'd like to press him on the intervention that was made earlier by the member for Rochester. He hasn't yet explained, given his signature to the amendment, how he reconciles his current position as he's enunciating it with his position as leading the amendment.
I suggest to you that what I've done is taken, and perhaps I'm being criticised for taking a pragmatic view on this, but I would say clearly that I actually want a ban, and what I feel what the only reason for that amendment was by putting down a 12-month criteria that you will have to reach a ban by then may not have settled the legal situation. So we don't actually want to give the government an excuse not to actually move into a ban. So therefore, that's what...
Can I ask him, what legal cases is he referring to? There are currently none in England or the United Kingdom. There are none in any place in Europe. There is only one possible case in Austria. Is he, as a former member of the European Parliament and allegedly a Eurosceptic, suggesting that we should wait for decisions in domestic courts in other capitals, let alone European courts, before making our own decisions in this country?
I actually covered that point at the beginning of my speech, saying that I do actually think this case in Austria is not a good one to put the whole plank of government policy on a reason why we cannot actually ban the circus animals being used, wild animals being used in circuses now. And so therefore, as far as I'm concerned, the only reason for the amendment was actually to give the government time to come forward with a ban. So I think clearly now, on all sides of this House, there is a move to ban wild animals being used in circuses. I think now we want to hear from the Minister very clearly what the timetable that's going to be, how we're going to deal with the court case, and move to a ban as quickly as possible. Thank you.
There's 4 minutes, 3 speakers, Simon Hart, but we must finish at 5:30.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm not a fan of wild animals in circuses. I wouldn't take my children to see them. I wouldn't go myself. I think the quicker we can move to a situation where they don't exist, the better. I don't even like dancing dogs on Britain's Got Talent very much. I think it's demeaning for the owner and the dog. And so I very much sympathise with many of the arguments which have been put this afternoon. However, what I like even less is taking a populist route, because it seems to be the easy one, against sometimes principle and evidence. We are charged, whether we like it or not, of taking a responsible approach to these things, which sometimes is difficult in the face of overwhelming and well-targeted pressure on us as MPs. And it seems to me we're making this more difficult for ourselves by confusing an argument about ethics and morality with one about legal enforceability. This is being complicated, obviously, with the possible haunting image of European court challenges. But in order to curtail the time, Mr. Deputy Speaker, regulation can work. I simply do not buy the argument that somehow this is going to open up a Pandora's box. If we are sensible about regulation, not only can we improve animal welfare standards, not only can we move to a situation, where where animals and circuses are a thing of the past, we can also do it without putting the taxpayer at risk and having to fork out for a lengthy and time-consuming and very expensive EU challenge. We can actually do it in reasonably quick time, and we can do it without the need for primary legislation. So the government was right about this 10 days ago when the Minister spoke in Westminster Hall. Nothing has changed in the interceding 10 days. It seems to me that if he, as I'm sure he is genuine to his word, we can achieve everything that everybody wants in this House without all of the nonsense and the cost that we are talking about, and the threat to the taxpayer, and I shall be voting against the motion tonight and commending the government's approach.
2 minutes, Tessa Munn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, nothing short of a ban seems to be the answer to make this absolutely clear. And there are so many organisations whose views have been represented during the debate this afternoon. I'd actually like particularly to pay tribute to Virginia McKenna and the Born Free Foundation, who are actually observing this debate from the Visitors' Gallery this afternoon. There are two quick points I'd like to make. The government's proposals for licensing and regulation are still going to be subject to a legal challenge, and I don't see how that would be any different. I'd refer the Minister to an answer to a parliamentary question in the European Parliament, which was answered by Commissioner Potonic, which is, what is the Commission doing to enforce animal welfare standards in European zoos and circuses? He deals with the question of zoos and then says quite clearly, circuses are specifically excluded from the scope of the Zoos Directive and are not covered by any other EU legislation. Therefore, the welfare of circus animals remains the responsibility of member states. And that was dated at the end of May. One last thing I'd like to mention. My constituent, Jerry Cottle, ran away at the age of 15 to the circus, and very successful he has been. I spoke to him yesterday. He said the circus has moved on and times have changed, and public opinion is against the dinosaurs, quote, who use wild animals in circuses. We don't need this. He runs a successful circus without animals, creating good old-fashioned theatre and entertainment. The real point is that there's no way any circus owner could possibly say that banning animals from circuses is a human rights issue, because this would cause a loss of livelihood, as many circuses operate without animals, and a testament to progress in this area. I support the motion, and I trust the Minister will hear the clamour here and outside for a ban.
Gavin Shucker, we've got 10 minutes from Mr Gavin Shucker of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'd like to congratulate the members for the Wrekin, Poplar and Limehouse and Colchester for their work in securing this debate. It's right that the debate was secured by the Backbench Business Committee, given the depth of feeling on all sides of this House, and it would seem appropriate to mention by name some of the members on the government benches who stood up and made brave speeches. I speak specifically about the members for Hendon, Manchester Withington, Richmond Park, South East Cornwall, Ealing Central, Colchester, Tiverton and Honiton. In many ways they are lions led by donkeys. And I'm pleased to say that we, as a party and as an opposition, stand firmly behind them. Indeed, almost every speaker has supported the ban who's spoken today, with the exception for the member of Romford, who looks like the man who bet everything on red and it came up black. But today, the Minister has the opportunity to stand up and to offer some kind of leadership in this situation. Unfortunately for him, however, it seems the position has changed since he took his seat. And that's a shame, because we want to hear a justification for his current position. Let me be clear, there is a majority in favour in this House for a ban. And the public consultation launched by Labour found massive support for the ban. Now, I have no desire to turn the cross-party consensus on this issue away, but it does raise some very serious questions about DEFRA's decision-making. A new government comes in, and what do we see? Yet more dither and delay. And in the place of a clear and consistent position from the government, I direct you to the Minister's answer of the 19th of May, because it was then, outrageously, that he said, "If people are really so opposed to the use of wild animals in circuses, I suggest that they do not go to the circus." What a pathetic response. Indeed, their department's entire response has not been great, to say the least. First, a year of delay, a year in which we've seen the shocking images of Anne the elephant being beaten, and who knows what else has gone unseen. Secondly, DEFRA dithering from the top, because in April the ban was on. The Secretary of State had made her decision, and she had briefed the Sunday Express that one would be introduced. But within a few weeks, she had made her first U-turn. The Secretary of State's favourite interviewer without coffee, the Prime Minister, had intervened in DEFRA's affairs once again, and now it was off. And thirdly, the incompetence of a department which many have described as being in special measures, because new decision made came the policy-based evidence-making process. The Secretary of State provided a written ministerial statement outlining her reasoning. In it, she cited an Austrian court case that didn't yet exist. A second statement tried to fix that. She had owned up about the case that the government had now only thought it was on after reading a press release. Dragged to the House for an urgent question, there was no apology for misleading its members, just the tired excuses we've come to expect. This time, amazingly, about the Human Rights Act. Talk about digging a hole for yourself. Now, the government refused to publish their legal advice, though of course they remain happy to hide behind it. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the government-backed amendment to today's motion, quite rightly not selected, called for a ban to be introduced as soon as legal impediments are resolved. And this raises some confusion, because first they say there are no legal impediments, then there are overwhelming legal impediments, and now there are resolvable legal impediments. This is less of a U-turn and more of a giant arc, gobbling and spitting out unprepared government ministers in its path. And now the free vote, U-turn complete. Most depressingly of all, they were right the first time. There is nothing wrong with banning the practice of wild animals in circuses, and that ban should be introduced right now. The government argues that a ban may contravene the European Services Directive, and that's not correct. The EU Commissioner for the Environment reiterated last month that its position had not changed. He said that the welfare of circus animals remains the responsibility of member states. The government states that there is a lack of scientific evidence in support of a ban. Again, not correct. A global research study, supported by the RSPCA, concludes that the species of non-domesticated animals commonly kept in circuses appear to be the least suited to a circus life. The government argue that a ban requires primary legislation, and again, this is incorrect. DEFRA's own impact assessment makes it clear that the powers under Section 12 of the Animal Welfare Act are sufficient to introduce a ban. I certainly will.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. Very fine words, but could he perhaps explain to the House why did his party, when they're in power, not actually do something about this issue?
I appreciate the opportunity to say what we did do in government. We banned animal testing for cosmetics. We banned the process of battery farm eggs. We created new powers to stop animal cruelty. We banned tail docking. We stopped the trade in seals. We ended fur farming, and we passed the hunt ban. Now, that is a record that I'm very proud to stand on as a Labour Member of Parliament. And we also introduced the 2006 Act that allows the minister sitting opposite me to ban the practice of wild animals performing in circuses, and that's exactly what we are calling for today. I certainly will.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way, and the previous government did have a reasonable record in animal welfare. However, it also had 4 years from the Act until they lost the general election. Why wasn't it done in those 4 years?
Well, I'm delighted to be able to say that we had a clear commitment to do this in this Parliament. As a Member of Parliament brought into this House, I share across this House a desire to see this ban implemented, and we must be clear about what the roadblock to this implementation being. And it is the Tory-led government which put in place these roadblocks in the first place. Now, I hope that we'll hear much, much more. I certainly will give way.
Grateful to the honourable gentleman giving way. Is it not the case that the strength of this debate has been the cross-party consensus, and notwithstanding the right of any member to make points about this government or previous governments, the strength has been all of the members working together, reflecting the will of Parliament and the British people?
I'm very glad to associate myself with those sentiments indeed. I do think there are serious questions to be raised, and we will certainly do that at a later date about this process. But the most important thing about tonight's vote is that we follow the members who raised this in the first place through the division lobby and see a ban enacted. One of my major concerns about the situation we're currently in if we don't pass this motion today is that the Circuses actually say that the government's licensing scheme could see an increase in the numbers of performing animals in British circuses, and surely that alone must give us a pause for thought. The issue is actually very straightforward, and the solution is pretty clear. They should introduce a ban under the previous government's Animal Welfare Act from 2006. Now, we know that events have moved on in this House since we started the debate. It now seems clear that there will be a free vote. I'm glad to hear that, because I believe that on issues such as this, on issues of conscience, we are strongest as a House when we stand together and where we stand up against the practices that have no place in a modern society. More importantly, maybe even than that, I believe that the team that we shadow, the DEFRA ministerial team, actually had the right position in the first place. They instinctively have felt that a ban is the right way to go on this issue. And for that reason, I would like to encourage them to go through the lobbies with us tonight, to make a very clear and definite case about the kind of society we seek to create. And in doing so, we'll be much stronger as a House together.
I'm just going to bring the Minister on. Can I just suggest that we've got till 5 before we bring on Matt Pitcher? Minister.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I will forgo this opportunity to use many of the numerous witticisms that I've heard during the course of the last 48 hours about my appearance here, but I will start by simply trying to say that I'm going to walk the tightrope over the next 10 or 15 minutes. But the debate that we've had, Mr Deputy Speaker, has, as several honourable members have shown, has demonstrated that, with one or two exceptions, there is passionate agreement across the floor of the House that we should see an end to the use of wild animals in circuses. There is nothing, and I want to assure the House, nothing that divides us on that front. When we came to office a year ago, we had the advantage of receiving the results of the consultation to which the Honourable Member for Poplar and Limehouse referred, and we had to examine all of the options, and of course a ban was that. We didn't have the advantage of the advice that he'd received, because of course that's confidential to that government. We had a new set of advice from our lawyers, and we had to use that in coming to our view. And it clearly indicated that there would be very serious risks of a legal challenge should we opt for an outright ban, despite our being minded to do so. And I will return to the detail of those legalities, because it's occupied much of the afternoon's debate, but it is for that reason, and in the interest of avoiding long judicial processes, that we concluded that the quickest way to reduce and hopefully eliminate cruelty to wild animals in our circuses would be a robust licensing system, which might well result in circuses deciding to stop keeping such animals. My honourable friend who moved this motion has shown diligence in pursuit of his cause. However, I'm afraid his dedication has allowed him to misrepresent a number of issues, some of which, in a moment I will, some of which have been repeated by other honourable members. I come firstly to the issue of the Commission's view about whether this is entirely a matter for Member States. I have to remind the House that the view of a Commissioner is simply that. I have seen the written letter that they sent to the Association for Protection of Captive Animals, and I understand that is the view of the Commission. But as I said in the House last time we debated this, At the end of the day, it is courts that interpret legislation, and our lawyers have to advise us not as to what the Commission's view is, but how they believe a court might interpret the legislation. I will give way to my honourable friend.
I'm grateful to the Minister, and had there been time for me to be called, I would have made the point that cruelty, in the sense of physical cruelty to animals, is not actually the only issue. There is the sense that actually people's experience of wild animals now is much richer through the internet, through television, indeed through the Cheltenham Science Festival, to make these completely unnecessary, and that there is increasing scientific evidence that actually there are complex emotions and intelligence in animals, especially intelligent in animals like elephants, that makes any kind of systematic confinement like this actually inherently cruel, even if physical cruelty isn't present.
I fully understand my honourable friend's comments, and I shall pick one or two of them up in a moment. My honourable friend from the Wrekin also... No, I'm going to make a few more points. I'm going to make a few more points before I give way. My honourable friend also listed, as other honourable members did, to a range of other countries which were allegedly have banned the use of wild animals in circuses. I'm afraid many of the countries to which those remarks were referred were just incorrect. A number have selectively banned certain species. A number have quite rightly banned wild-caught wild animals, which is a very different issue. We also have this issue to which my humble friend referred and others did, about licensing might mean more animals in circuses. I find that very difficult to believe. I note the comments of the circuses to which has been referred. But the fact is that if those licence conditions, we're not just talking about issuing a licence, we're talking about very tough conditions under which an animal would need to be kept in order to get a licence. And if those conditions were very, very tough, I find it very difficult to believe that more would... Yes, of course I could.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'm sure the whole House would like to hear what those tough licensing conditions would be if they incorporate travelling for weeks on end up and down motorways, chained to the back, chained in a cage, going from place to place. Because if they do incorporate that, then I think many people will conclude that they're not worth the paper they're written on.
That may well be the judgment that the honourable member and many others, and indeed probably even I, would come to. But the reality is that, as we've said quite clearly, we would go out to consultation in order to come to the view as to what those standards should be. May I just conclude my comments about the introductory speech, my honourable friend, because he never made any attempt to justify using Section 12 of the Animal Welfare Act, and I want to refer to that in a little bit more detail now, because the honourable member for... In a minute, the honourable member for Poplar and Limehouse referred to it as well, and I respect him immensely. I think we shared that mutual respect when I shadowed him, and it remains the case. But I do need just to correct his memory on the previous European case, without going through all the detail. But he actually said in his remarks that the Circus lost against the Ombudsman. That's not the case. The Ombudsman actually made a very damning criticism of maladministration against the Commission, on the view that they believed the Commission was abdicating its responsibility to maintain the treaties by not interfering in Member States' rights. So there is a distinction there. But he also reminded us of the Animal Welfare Act. And I served on that committee, as did the Honourable Lady for Plenethly, and I remember her efforts in that time. I told the Honourable Member I'll give way in a moment. And she will recall, as she's described, her own efforts to introduce a ban. At that stage, it was resisted by the then Minister, the Right Honourable Member for Exeter, and indeed it was resisted by the Noble Lord Rooker in another place. However, in the report stage, on the 8th of March 2006, the Right Honourable Member for Exeter stated, and I want to quote from Hansard, I intend to use a regulation under Clause 10 of the Animal Welfare Bill to ban the use in travelling circuses of certain non-domesticated species, etc., etc. The reality is that was in March 2006, over 4 years before the general election. And whatever the Honourable Member for Poplar and Limehouse's good intent was, the fact is that his government then did nothing despite that declared intent. Mr. Speaker, I'll give way to the Honourable Member.
I'm very grateful for the Minister to give way. Can we go to the root cause of this problem between everyone else and the Minister today? It seems that he's pinning his case on the fact that someone might take legal action and they might win that court case. On that basis, this House couldn't pass any legislation.
Mr. Speaker, I'm coming exactly to that. If at the end of this debate the House were to approve this motion, then of course the government will have to respect that. However, I believe as the Minister I'm duty bound to lay before the House the possible, and I stress possible, consequences of that decision. Not just for the government, but for the House itself, for taxpayers and even possibly the animals which concern us. So let me no, I'm not going to give way any more. The Honourable Member hasn't been here for much of the debate. Let me turn to the legal advice which we have received regarding the use of Section 12 of the 2006 Act for a total ban. Our advice is that whilst that section can be used as a basis for a ban, it is highly likely that we would be challenged on the basis that an outright ban was disproportionate in terms of improving the welfare in circuses. And that is exactly the same advice as the previous government received from the Radford report, which it commissioned after that discussion in 2006, when the Radford report made it absolutely clear that it believed that there was insufficient evidence in order to make sure that the welfare of animals could only be improved by a ban and could not be improved by other ways. That was their advice. It remains the legal advice now. Now, I want to finish the legal issues before I give way any more. Obviously, I cannot tell the House that there would be a challenge, and I cannot tell the House what the result would be. But we do have to note the advice. That Radford... No, I'm not going to give way for a minute until I finish the legal discussion. The Radford review, carried out in 2007, concluded that no scientific evidence existed to show that circuses, by their very nature, compromise the welfare of wild animals, and it was on that basis that they concluded that banning on welfare grounds would be disproportionate in the absence of evidence that welfare was compromised. And I should add also, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that there are two further risks to this action. Firstly, the cost to the taxpayer, and secondly, that a court may agree to suspend the ban until legal proceedings had concluded. In other words, whilst the law itself may have passed, nothing would have actually changed for the animals themselves. This is in comparison to a licensing system which would be in place by the end of the year. If I turn now to the European aspects of the legislation, I'm well aware of who wishes to intervene. The European legislation would apply whether we use primary or secondary legislation to implement a ban. In her statement of the 19th of May, my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, informed the House of the error in referring to an action currently before the courts in the European Union. I repeat our regret over that error. Nevertheless, I can inform the House, as has already been stated, that as I predicted on the same day, a case has now been laid by Circus Krone against the Austrian government in the Austrian Constitutional Court. The fact that case has been laid, we know not the outcome, but it does support the legal advice which we have previously reported to the House, namely that a wholesale ban may well be counter to Section 16 of the EU Services Directive, and that any subsequent legal challenge would have the same consequences which I have described. I give way.
Extremely grateful to the Minister for giving way, and it's well known in the House that I don't often give free legal advice. He's referred the House to the advice that he's received. I have no doubt that is the advice he has received. I have to tell him, however, that in my opinion that advice is wrong, and that having seen the quality of some of the advice that the government receives from the European Scrutiny Committee, it's about time that outside legal advice was taken.
Mr. Speaker, no doubt we could lay every lawyer in the House end to end and not reach a definite conclusion. I note my honourable friend's comments, and obviously I respect them. Mr. Deputy Speaker, may I come to the nub of the issue? When honourable members decide in a few minutes' time how to react to the resolution before us tonight, I hope they will pay heed to what I have said about the risks attached to it. It is, of course, a matter for the House to decide, but I do hope that honourable members will focus not about whether we ban or indeed whether we wish to end cruelty. I hope there's no doubt about our desire on the latter point, but how we actually go about achieving that end of cruelty in circuses on which we are, I believe, united. Whilst a complete ban as advocated in this motion might well achieve this in time, there are, as I've tried to describe, significant risks in taking it forward with the deadline and using the legal mechanism to which my honourable friend referred. That is why the government came forward with a proposal which could achieve the same end with more certainty. Nevertheless, as I say, the House has a right to decide otherwise. There are, I understand and fully respect, very high emotions involved, including the issue of the ethics of animals performing for human entertainment, and I'm sorry, Honourable Lady, I'm rapidly coming to the end of my time. I share the views of many of those. I share the views of honourable members who are concerned about the use of performing animals. I share those views. But I also have to react to and respect the legislation that we have enacted in the past in this House. And the reality is that the Animal Welfare Act of 2006, Section 12, does not allow ethical considerations to be a justification for a ban. So I hope that honourable members, in considering how to vote, will consider these points. The government is determined to stamp out cruelty and bad welfare for animals in circuses. We have put forward our proposals. It is, of course, for the House to decide that we perhaps should reconsider that. But I do ask that the House should consider the legislative background against which they are asking us to do it.
Mark Pitcher.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Can I first of all pay tribute and thank the Minister, who has, I think, been very brave and courageous today and deserves a parliamentary medal for a valiant attempt to defend the indefensible, given his own personal position, which he stated clearly on the floor of the House on the 19th of May. Can I also, Mr. Deputy Speaker, thank all members from all sides of the House for what I think has been a very vibrant debate, a debate which I think has informed the House on a wide range of issues relating to what I believe is an important issue, and more importantly, what 92% of the public believe is an important issue. This nation once led the world in animal welfare. There is no reason why we can't drag ourselves into the 21st century and regain and reclaim those global animal welfare credentials. And that is why I hope that members will support my motion. Thank you.
The question is the motion on the order paper. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.